Breaking news. With the crisis worsening, Putin's Russia has begun cracking down on anti-war activists. The arrest of Boris Kagarlitsky, a prominent socialist intellectual, prompted Russian President Vladimir Putin to remark on July 29. It is the year 2023, and Russia is engaged in an armed conflict with a neighbor. Furthermore, I believe that we ought to adopt a particular stance towards domestic terrorists. Kagarlitsky's alleged harm stems from a Telegram post he made on October 8, 2022, in which he discussed the military repercussions of a recent attack on a bridge in the Crimea. Since July 25 he has been detained for questioning, and if found guilty of justifying terrorism, he faces up to 7 years in prison. Putin emphasized that we must keep in mind that everyone needs to follow certain rules for success, even in a conflict zone. Prigozhin, who Putin accused of treason, after Prigozhin led his Wagner mercenary troops in a coup attempt in late June, only to let him walk free, was the inspiration for the ironic comment that Kagarlitsky should have launched an armed mutiny instead of simply voicing his anti-war opinions on Russian anti-war telegram channels. Although Prigozhin's coup attempt was unsuccessful, it did reveal Putin's vulnerabilities and set off a crisis at home. While Ukrainian forces pursue their latest counteroffensive, Russian military leaders and pro-war bloggers warn of dwindling morale and heavy losses. The Kremlin has responded to the mutiny by purging prominent military leaders, imprisoning pro-war critic and far-right extremist Igor Girkin, and increasing the prison term for opposition leader Alexei Navalny by 19 years. The domestic crisis also explains the imprisonment of arguably the most prominent public left-wing voice in Russia opposing the war. But the war against domestic dissent has been going on, and it has only gotten worse since Kagarlitsky's arrest. Several high-profile leftist politicians and activists have been labeled foreign agents since the beginning of June, a label that comes with strict restrictions on their personal and professional lives and is widely seen as the final step before arrest. Yevgeny Stupin, Mikhail Timonov, Vitaly Bover, and Mikhail Lobanov were all expelled from their university and the Moscow City Duma, respectively. Ivan Kudrashov, a peace activist, was convicted that same month and given a 6-year prison term. Officers from the Federal Security Service, FSB, tortured Kudrashov after he was arrested in September for a "fuck the war" themed piece of street art before he confessed to planning an arson attack on a military enlistment office. Lev Skoryakin and Elena Krylova, two members of the Left Bloc, were arrested in Kyrgyzstan in June and are scheduled to be deported back to Russia at Moscow's request. The same fate awaits anarchist anti-war activist Alexei Rashkov. It is illegal to publicly criticize the so-called special military operation in Russia, where more than 2,000 people have been imprisoned for opposing the war, according to Amnesty International. Given the circumstances, on July 29 the Russian Socialists Against War Coalition issued a statement declaring, "The campaign in defense of Kagarlitsky is not just a matter for his relatives, colleagues, or human rights activists. The likelihood of future repressions can be mitigated through political action, such as opposition to each new attack." The author writes, in this case, such action could unite not only leftists, but also representatives of other segments of the Russian anti-war movement, and many thousands of people around the world who have heard Kagarlitsky's name, read his books and articles, and argued with him. Controversy. An expansive international solidarity movement has emerged, with people and groups of widely divergent opinions on Russia's war in Ukraine all calling for the release of Kagarlitsky and all other political prisoners. Among those to declare their support are British politicians Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell, Swiss parliamentarian Stefania Prezioso, European deputy Miguel Urban Crespo, Brazilian federal MPs Fernanda Melchiona and Samia Bonfim, Puerto Rican Senator Rafael Bernabe, Pussy Riot member Nadia Tolokonnikova and academics such as Slavoj Žižek, Enzo Traverso, Alina Barbara Lopez Hernandez, Etienne Bolivar, Simon Pirani and many more. However, some on the left are troubled by Kagarlitsky's case because of the differing views he has expressed regarding Russia's military interventions in Ukraine. Kagarlitsky viewed Russia's annexation of Crimea and its military support for pro-Russian separatist movements in Donbass as progressive and anti-imperialist, back in 2014. According to Ukrainian socialist Andriy Mavchin, Kagarlitsky's stance allowed him to become a frequent guest on state television, and he found himself surrounded by people associated with Russia's so-called patriotic left, which Mavchin says often involved conservative and imperialist positions. Kagarlitsky, on the other hand, fought against Russia's all-out invasion in 2022. Kagarlitsky was instrumental in organizing the anti-war Round Table of the Left Forces, which issued a scathing indictment of Putin's aggression against our brothers and sisters of the Ukrainian people, and called on all Russians to lead an anti-war agitation with your neighbors, relatives, colleagues, and other citizens of Russia on the day of the invasion. In an interview with the Analysis News, Kagarlitsky outlined his position, which he has maintained throughout the conflict, saying, in 2014, I was critical of the Ukrainian policy of military intervention in Donbass. This time, however, things are backwards. Putin and his cronies are the ones who initiated hostilities. They need to be punished in some fashion. Mavchin notes that this shift has led to anti-war content from Marxist positions being published on Rabkor's YouTube channel and website since the invasion began, and that other anti-war leftists and even liberals began to appear on Kagarlitsky's live streams, people who were on the opposite side of the argument from him 8 years ago. This is why there has been silence on Kagarlitsky's arrest from some people who have supported Russia in this conflict and who were strong advocates for him in 2014. On the other side of the coin, there are those who believe Kagarlitsky's case is nothing more than a distraction, and that Ukraine supporters should stop showing solidarity with him. In light of this controversy, the editorial collective of Russian left anti-war site Pozil declared, Kagarlitsky's numerous books and public speeches had a great influence on several generations of the Russian left, and that is why his responsibility for certain assessments remained exceptionally high. As of 2014, Kagarlitsky actively supported the annexation of Crimea and the creation of the so-called People's Republics in eastern Ukraine. Unfortunately, this aid helped disorient some members of Russia's left. The members of the Pozil team find these actions, along with many others by Kagarlitsky, to be totally unacceptable. There has been no reconciliation of our core disagreements, and we intend to have that conversation with Boris as soon as he is free. Stop the war now. The arrest of Kagarlitsky, according to Pozil, is part of a new massive repressive campaign by the authorities to completely clear the political space of any critics of the war. It's become abundantly clear that the level of repression is increasing, and the number of activists in the direct danger zone has correspondingly risen. They use this to argue for a global movement in support of Kagarlitsky and other political prisoners. In light of the fact that he was arrested for his anti-war beliefs, Mavchin argues, for this reason alone, Kagarlitsky deserves international solidarity. Nonetheless, he adds a crucial point. Without an anti-war movement inside Russia itself, it will be very difficult, perhaps impossible, to end the war in Ukraine. Although Russian society is not perfect, an anti-war and anti-government movement can arise only from its flawed people with their flawed histories. Anyone who impedes this progress causes harm. Kagarlitsky did a lot of work in the last 18 months to get us closer.